So most people should know the Covington story, but let's go over it quickly to set the context for this video. So apparently a bunch of kids from a Catholic school surrounded and taunted a Native American man. This event happened on the 18th at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. The media jumped on it. The story of these MAGA hat-wearing kids harassing an elderly Native American spread like wildfire. The Native American man, whose name was Nathan Phillips, was seen all over the media telling his side of the story, and the kids were villainized. It was demanded that the kids be expelled from school. There were threats against the kids. There was just one problem. The story that began with the kids confronting and surrounding the Native American man was actually shown to be untrue. For starters, he was shown to be approaching them. Now, this was explained as him trying to act as a peacemaker between the Catholic students and some hate preachers that were nearby known as the Black Hebrew Israelites. As he was walking through the students, he reached one kid and he claimed that that kid was blocking his path. Now, on either side of the screen here, we can see Nathan Phillips and Nicholas Sandman, the child who was apparently blocking Nathan Phillips. Now, as I've already said, Nathan Phillips' face was everywhere on the news, during which time some of his claims started to fall apart. This included some claims about his life story. It was splashed around everywhere that he was a Vietnam vet. It turns out that the way he had been represented wasn't entirely true, and that he'd never actually even left the country, much less fought overseas. In the same time that Nathan Phillips was being given a voice seemingly everywhere, Nicholas Sandman was nowhere to be seen. He did release a statement, so presumably he wanted to explain his side of the story. But it took 4 days before one network, and one network alone, NBC, sat down and had a chat to him. Nobody else has talked to Nicholas Sandman before, and nobody has talked to him since. People started sharing some extra footage around which showed the event from some different angles. Not only did it show that Phillips had a lot of room and wasn't sort of trapped in places he'd claimed, it showed that some of his group were actually aggressors. There was one moment where a Native American man is yelling at a student, amongst other things, to go back to Europe.
Why did you go back to Europe where you came from? This is not your land. No, it's not. You've been here 2-3 generations. Compared to us, we've been here a million fucking years.
Phillips, who had claimed previously that he was wandering to the group of school kids in order to act as a peacemaker, did nothing to stop the exchange between the Native American man and the school student. But one person that did try to stop the argument was Nicholas Sandman, the boy initially alleged to be the aggressor. Now, to reiterate what I said at the start of this video, this event happened on the 18th of January. Nicholas and his classmates had been at the March for Life. Nathan Phillips and his group had been at the Indigenous Peoples March. So let's jump ahead to the next day, the 19th. On that night, an event happened that initially I dismissed just because of the source that was reporting it. The Catholic News Agency, which you'll see up on the screen, claimed that Nathan Phillips and a group of activists had tried to protest a Saturday Mass in Washington. Now, being the Catholic News Agency, you do have to take that news with a grain of salt, which I initially did. And then I saw some footage. Now, I believe this footage was probably shot by someone at the event, but the footage was found, edited, and uploaded to a Daily Caller YouTube channel. So keep that in mind. Now, while it is edited down, I'm really not sure how else to interpret a lot of the stuff that's actually being said in these videos. So one of the first people we see talking introduces somebody that I think will be a recognisable face.
Here in peaceful gathering to have Uncle Nate read demands of the Indigenous folks of this land to the Catholic Church as a whole entire organization.
So Nathan Phillips reads out a list of demands for the Catholic Church as a whole, but there are some demands that he reads out at the start which are kind of interesting.
We demand that the students of Covington Catholic High School be reprimanded, not just by the school officials, but as seniors, but by their upcoming universities.
So according to the demands that he reads out here, not only does he want the Covington kids punished by their school, he also wants them punished by future universities, some that they've not applied to or probably not even chosen yet. Now, as the video goes on, we can see he makes other demands of the Catholic Church as a whole organisation. But there are a couple of other interesting things said at this protest by other people.
Uncle Nate has fought for us overseas. He has fought for us here.
Yeah, except for the fact that he hasn't. It's actually been shown that he hasn't served overseas. And there was one more thing said in these videos that I thought was noteworthy.
Whether it be at a Catholic church, it don't matter, Catholic school, whatever, we're still gonna come on this property. It's all ours anyway.
So it sounds like they're willing to be confrontational to anything regarding the Catholic Church, whether it be something to do with the church itself or whether it be to do with a Catholic school. Like, for example, the school kids that they'd got into a confrontation with the day before. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it though. So anyway, on the night of the 19th, a lot of news stations started broadcasting images of the confrontation that had taken place the previous day. Some outlets like CNN had even talked to Nathan Phillips. They played the story and intercut with him talking about the experience. But there was one news outlet on the 19th that actually headed out and talked to Mr. Phillips about the event that had occurred the day before. That outlet was NBC. Now, I'm not sure whether they talked to him before the protest at the Catholic Basilica or afterwards, but there were a couple of clues that it happened around that time of night. The first clue is that Nathan Phillips can be seen wearing the same thing as he is in the protest videos. The second clue is that a protest sign actually ends up slipping into shot. It appears for a fair chunk of time. But the third clue, which is a little bit more subtle, that maybe this interview took place around the time of the protest at the Catholic Basilica, would be the giant Catholic Basilica in the background. Now, far be it from me to tell a news outlet like NBC how to do their job, but I have a suggestion. Let's say you go talk to a Native American man who had gotten into a confrontation with some Catholic school kids. Let's say that when you arrive, the man in question is engaging in a protest against the Catholic Church in front of a giant Catholic building. I would expect that would lead to a few questions, but maybe that's just me. And by the way, these clips I'm showing right now are from a 2.5-minute video of nothing but Nathan Phillips talking. I'm sure there might have been questions to help prompt what he's actually saying in this video, but all of those were removed from the clip. It's literally just Nathan Phillips talking uninterrupted about the horrible experience that had happened to him the day before. Now, Nathan Phillips being able to give an unchallenged opinion on his clash with some Catholic students the day before, while at the time attending an anti-Catholic rally, that's probably not the worst thing about this situation. It's definitely not good, but I think there might be something more important to discuss. So the worst part for me would be the two interviews that were done by NBC. Now, the first interview with Nicholas Sandmann was pre-recorded, and then there was an interview a day later with Nathan Phillips that was a live interview. There is an issue with those two different formats for the two different interview subjects, though. See, the problem in a pre-recorded interview is, depending on how it's shot, answers can be taken and placed next to questions where the answer and the question weren't actually what was said. It means that a question can be presented and the answer that can be given may have been for a completely different question. Now, I don't know if that was a problem in this interview, but one other thing that can be done, and this was a problem, is that when a question is asked and Nicholas Sandmann gives an answer, extra information can be sliced in after that answer is given. Now, that may just help to clarify the answer that he's given, but as we're going to see in an example, it can also be used to try and negate an answer that is given. So when the video that we're watching now first emerged, claims were made that the kids were chanting things, including racist taunts, but also things like "build the wall." This has never been proven. Several hours of video from a whole bunch of different angles seem to debunk this, and nowhere can it be heard by anyone that's watched the video. But let's see how NBC frame it when they ask about a statement that, by their own admittance, doesn't appear to actually be on camera.
Did anyone say, "build the wall"?
I never heard anyone say "build the wall," and I don't think I've seen it in any videos.
After a review of the videos, NBC News could not hear anyone shouting that hot-button phrase. But Nathan Phillips claims he heard the teens shout, "build the wall."
Oh, yeah, I heard that.
So let me see if I've got this right. The man who has issues with the Catholic Church told NBC that the Catholic kids said something bad in an interview that NBC did at a Catholic protest. Why wouldn't you take his word for it in that situation? Never mind that in multiple hours of videos from various angles, no kid is ever heard saying build the wall, something again which NBC themselves admit. Next thing you'll tell me is that Nathan Phillips took issues with them wearing MAGA hats and that there's some sort of photo out there showing that maybe he doesn't like Trump. Also, why is that little clip framed so weirdly? Call me cynical, but could it be that there were some protest signs in the background and that they had to crop the image really tightly so that those weren't actually seen? That's just a guess on my part. This interview with Nicholas Sandmann was overall pretty bad and pretty accusatory, and I think you can kind of see the tone of it in the very first question that was asked, that was also sent out in a promotional tweet by NBC.
Do you feel from this experience that you owe anybody an apology? Do you see your own fault in any way?
So Savannah Guthrie asked the 16-year-old Catholic school kid if he should apologise to the 64-year-old Native American man, who NBC knows is against Catholicism, given that they interviewed him at a protest against the Catholic Church. And I think we can really see the different treatment in the two people in this situation if we jump over to the Nathan Phillips interview that happened the next day. Especially if we consider that that was the opening question for Nicholas Sandmann, and we see what the opening question is for Nathan Phillips. Now pay special attention to what's actually written at the bottom of the screen before Nathan Phillips gets asked his first question.
Mr. Phillips, good morning to you.
Good morning.
First of all, first question, how are you doing? This has been a whirlwind few days for you. You find yourself on the front page of every newspaper. How are you doing and how are you feeling?
So right after we see text saying that the school the kids attend has been getting threats, Nathan Phillips, the instigator of this situation, has been asked, how are you doing and how are you feeling? But it gets worse. So he gets asked if he's seen the interview that we just saw a couple of snippets from. And not only does he say he's not watched most of it, but he doesn't even get challenged on the fact that he hasn't watched most of it.
Somebody tried to show it to me before I went to my prayer ceremony, and I got into about the first 30 seconds, 40 seconds of it, and I said, well, that's all I needed to hear.
And what was your reaction to it? How did it make you feel? What did you think about his words and his explanation and his version of this encounter?
What did he think of an interview he hasn't actually seen? That's some pretty great journalism there.
Coached and written up for him, insincerity, lack of responsibility. You know, those are the words I came up with.
Wow, this answer's actually quite impressive. Given that Nathan Phillips has only watched 30 seconds of an interview, he seems to be able to say a lot about it. Now, I've mentioned it before, but the claim that the kids in this incident chanted "build the wall" has absolutely no proof. But not only is this point brought up again, let's hear how it's asked.
Did you hear anyone say, build that wall? It isn't audible on the video clips, I think, that are out there, but did you hear that?
So I'm wondering about something. If Savannah Guthrie is admitting in her own question that there is no evidence for Nathan Phillips' claim here, why is she asking him to restate this unproven claim? The cynic in me says that she wants to get him to say it on tape so they can cut it into stories later on throughout the day. Anyway, she goes on to ask about Nathan Phillips' military record, which became a point of contention over the couple of days after the initial incident. Take note of her asking the question and then, before letting him answer, essentially prompting him with what he has apparently already said.
You were a veteran. You served in the Marine Corps. Some have said that you were a Vietnam veteran. I don't believe you have said that. What exactly is the nature of your service?
Now, after he goes on a bit for a bit of a long-winded answer, she gets him to clarify.
So to be clear, you served in the Marines at the time that Vietnam was going on, but you did not serve overseas.
What I've always said is I've never stepped foot in South Vietnam. And that's, I don't know how much clearer can that be?
Well, given that someone at Nathan Phillips' own protest rally said this...
Nate has fought for us overseas. He has fought for us here.
Apparently, he could actually be clearer than he has been. So the way NBC has handled this whole situation is just appalling. It was bad enough to give these terrible interviews, but we need to remember that only 24 hours after the initial incident, NBC went out to interview Nathan Phillips in the middle of an anti-Catholic protest rally and could therefore clearly see there was more to this clash between Native Americans and Catholic school kids. But did they update the story, give more information? No. They allowed the students to be demonized and the Native American to still be declared a hero. Savannah Guthrie didn't even challenge Nathan Phillips on the fact that the very next night he went and protested outside this giant Catholic basilica. That seems an important thing to bring up. There can be lazy journalism, there can be incompetent journalism, but no, this really seems like malicious journalism, and to be honest, I use that term pretty loosely. These were kids that were receiving death threats. These were kids that may have been kicked out of school for something that not only wasn't really their fault given the footage that we saw, but given the extra information we know, it seems like most probably they were actually targeted. We don't know that for sure though, because the one station that was actually in a position to try and figure that out didn't do their damn job. I really hope that NBC actually sit down, have a think about what they've done here, and maybe have a difficult conversation. One that I think probably needs to look like this.
Do you feel from this experience that you owe anybody an apology? Do you see your own fault in any way?
I'm really not holding my breath though. Anyway, I hope you guys liked what I did here. It is my first video, so obviously it's a bit rough. I'll have to keep working on it, see if I can improve. Hope you guys have a good one, and I'll see you next time.